Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. To start off the show, we want to bring you an update in the Doomsday cult mom murder trial. That's right, the trial against Lori Vallow Daybell, the 49-year-old Idaho woman who faces conspiracy and first-degree murder charges in relation to the death of her 7-year-old son, JJ Vallow, and 16-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan, as well as her husband's first wife, Tammy Daybell. Now, her husband, Chad Daybell, is facing similar charges because the bodies of these children were found on his property, as well as other evidence linking him to the crimes, and he's going to be tried separately at a later date. But we want to talk about Lori Vallow Daybell's trial. And as we head into day 3 of this case, we have with us a very special guest. Back with us, Law and Crime's Gigi McIvey is here with us to bring us the very latest on what has happened. She is live outside the Ada County Courthouse. Good morning, Gigi. You have been inside that courthouse. You have been watching this unfold in real time. Let's talk about yesterday. Very difficult day. Who did the state call? What were some of the noteworthy moments?
Well, Detective Ray Hermosillo from the Rexburg Police Department was on the stand all day. He was one of the very first people on this case, even before it was known the kids were missing. And he walked us through the beginning of the surveillance on Lori and Chad to find the Jeep that was actually driven down to Arizona in the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux, who is the ex-nephew-in-law of Lori Vallow. Her niece was married to him and was part of that group. And then it led up to the welfare check all the way through to where they found the kids' bodies on Chad's property. And after that, we were shown just some unimaginable photos. There's really just no words to describe how horrific the images we saw yesterday were.
I hate to do this. I don't want to talk about it, but I think it's important to talk about it. What did we learn maybe that we didn't know before about the condition of the children's bodies?
Well, we knew that Tylee was burned and dismembered, and JJ was found wrapped in plastic trash bags and had duct tape from his chin to his forehead and then across from ear to ear. He was duct taped from the elbows down with a big ball of duct tape around his hands, as well as his ankles duct taped. And, for Tylee, it was there actually were some more remains there than I would have imagined they would have had, just based on what we had heard before. We were shown very graphic images of charred bone and things of that nature, just nothing identifiable, obviously. But then, with JJ, we were shown the photo of him once they got everything off of him, and it was clear who that child was. And Detective Hermosillo got very emotional and quiet and solemn on the stand when he said, after everything was taken off, it was clear this was the little boy I'd been looking for months on that table.
It is so horrifying to think about it. I mean, we're showing right now pictures of these children when they were alive. To think about their end is just, it's really unimaginable. And I'm curious, you watched it, what was the jury doing throughout this process? Were they crying? Were they looking at all of this? Because, it's interesting, you and I talked during the jury selection process where the jurors said they'd be able to sit through and look at these photos, but I told you there's one thing very different from saying you can do it and actually watching it. What was their reaction?
It's really true. You take ordinary citizens that have normal jobs that don't want to look at this kind of thing. They chose not to go in that career field, and you are exposing them to this as part of their civic duty. And there were men and women alike that had tissues wiping their eyes. There were just looks of shock that this happened to these children, and people were looking at Lori. We had some drama before these photos were shown with her not wanting to stay in the courtroom. She asked to waive her right to appear that day, and the judge made her stay. So people were looking at her after they looked at the pictures. Some looked a little longer than others. Some very quickly diverted their eyes, but emotional all around, very solemn. And it really impacted every juror that I was able to look at while these photos were on the screen.
Let's talk about that. There was a bit of back and forth drama. Remember, for everybody out there, there's no cameras in the courtroom. We're not seeing this in real time. But Gigi, we were following your tweets and updates about it. And there were, Lori Vallow was in the courtroom, then she left the courtroom. There were talks between the attorneys. What was going on behind the scenes in terms of her wanting to waive her right to be present when these photos were being shown?
Well, I noticed when she came back in from lunch, she looked like she had been crying, which is something we have not seen since day one of jury selection. I haven't seen any real emotion out of her at all. And I turned to who I was sitting next to and said, something's up. Like, she's had a hard time over lunch. And the photos that they showed before lunch were disturbing, but definitely not to the caliber of what we saw after lunch. So for 30 minutes, they call a break and come back out. We're all wondering, is she going to just plead guilty to avoid this, or maybe is she just incompetent? But the judge had heard oral arguments and said, you have to stay. And it was interesting because at one point, all the bailiffs went back into that little area where she was with her attorneys and left the courtroom without a bailiff, which is odd. Then she fell asleep towards the end of the presentation of these photos and slept up until the end of the trial. So just pure speculation on my part. I'm wondering maybe if she was medicated back there, because since day one, she has never given any sign that she was drowsy or having a hard time staying awake, but she was sound asleep yesterday for about 30 minutes.
But she was emotional at certain points while the photos were being shown.
The only emotion that well, she didn't look at the screen, though. When she was awake for the first part, she had her head down, kind of turned away from the screen, more facing her attorney. But the only emotion I really saw was after she came in from lunch. And then after the ruling that she had to stay, she kind of looked like a toddler that had a cookie taken away. She was none too happy.
Were the jurors looking at her sleeping? And what was their reaction to that?
But they were glancing over. It really, there was no visible reaction from the jurors. But I think if you put two and two together, these jurors are just going to think she's avoiding it, to where if they don't know that she was incompetent for 10 months, they may not realize she could have been medicated yesterday as well.
Now, obviously, difficult day for the jury, difficult day for everybody in that courtroom. Family members there yesterday, and who was there, and what was their reaction to what was happening?
Well, first off, there's nobody here for Lori. Not one person sitting there in support of her. A lot of Charles's family is here. The grandparents, Kay Woodcock, the grandmother, chose not to sit in yesterday to see these photos. Larry Woodcock, the grandfather, was there, and he held a tissue in his hand, kept his head down, and muffled his sobs in that tissue as these photos were being shown. Charles's ex-wife and his adult sons were here. Charles is Lori's fourth husband, who was shot and killed by Alex Cox back in July of 2019. His sons were here. They were seen sobbing after those photos were shown, and we took a short break. So a lot of the Vallow family here, one of his brothers, his sister-in-law for Charles Vallow. So, yeah, the strong showing by the Vallow family for JJ, Tylee, and Tammy. Nobody here for Lori, but emotions running high all around, as you could imagine.
What was the defense doing in terms of, I mean, clearly a strong day for the prosecution showing these kind of photos and laying out the story. It's not great evidence for Lori Vallow. But let me ask you, what was the defense's questioning? Did they cross-examine these witnesses at all, and what was their strategy?
The cross-exam on Hermosillo, he's actually still on cross-exam. That will resume this morning. It wasn't focused that much on anything pertinent to me. It kind of seemed aimless. It was, you were a very new detective when this case came forward. And why did you bust down the door during the search warrant? And Detective Hermosillo said, well, we were looking for a missing kid. That's why. He asked, what was the crime? Well, the crime was they lied about JJ's whereabouts. So it was that line of questioning almost of, why did you do this search warrant? And so we were all kind of looking at each other like, well, it's really obvious answers. I don't think the defense has much to go on. I mean, Lori wanted this speedy trial, and it was kind of clear in pretrial motions and arguments that they did not, that the attorneys wanted some more time. They're very new to this case, considering the fact these crimes happened 3 years ago.
Right.
And so, I think they got a couple of hands tied behind their back. Couple that with the fact she did not want to bring mental illness in as part of her defense. So a lot of things have to kind of just be left out there. They're not going to be able to bring that in. So I think for jurors who really don't know Lori Vallow, it may seem like she's indifferent and doesn't care, when she's just choosing not to bring up whatever diagnosis she got during the 10 months she was in the mental hospital to the table in her defense. So we'll see how that plays out.
And we know insanity is not a defense out in Idaho, but maybe mental illness could have played a role. I will tell you, I did think it was interesting, the defense in their opening statement, where they said, she's charged with different crimes, different theories. Even the prosecution can't definitively say what role she had or what exactly happened, and they're asking you to figure it out. I thought that was something. We'll see which way they explore it. Now let's talk about today. What do we expect? Who's going to be called day 3?
Well, the witness list is sealed, so we really have no idea after Detective Hermosillo who would be up next. I kind of theorize maybe we'll get into the pathologist since we've led up to where the kids were at the medical examiner's office. Seems like doing it in chronological order that way may be best. And then they've got to start introducing these main players, such as Melanie Gibb, who was a friend of Lori's, and Zulema, who was in this group. But I think the way they're doing it and not bombarding the jury with names, because there are so many, to maybe just introduce people and how they fit in as they testify might be the way to go in such a convoluted case.
All right. Gigi McIvey, great reporting as always. Thank you for being there, and particularly yesterday with the drama and such difficult material being presented. You've been doing a great job for us, Gigi. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. So we're going to take a quick break. We're obviously going to check in with Gigi a little bit later on in the day as more updates happen in day 3 of this trial. We're going to take a break. I'm going to sign off. But when we come back, we're going to switch gears and learn a little bit more of the Letitia Stauch trial, another big high-profile case we're focusing here on the network. We'll be back.